Hello, Flexo colleagues in Poland. I am very glad to welcome you to Brobygrafiska in Sweden, Sunne, Sweden. My name is Bo Thulin and I'm working as a teacher in the print shop here. And we are actually standing in the middle of the print shop right now. And behind us is our installment of the Flexo press, which is a Flexo S6, but that will one of my other colleagues explain a little bit more about. But you should know that that is the machine we mostly use for education to become a professional Flexo printer. But I have beside me here two Flexo colleagues, so they can present themselves. I'll hand over the microphone to the first one.
Hello all of you, my name is Torbjörn Edvardsson and I'm working on the school as a teacher in pre-press. And together with my colleague beside me, we're setting up standards for printing.
Hello everyone, my name is Daniel and I'm also working as a teacher in the print shop here on Brobygrafiska.
Yes, we said a moment ago that we were thinking about standard and standardization. And we are thinking of giving a presentation today how we put up a standard in our school, because the question is, of course, in the Flexo industry, is a standard for each and every one of those who print Flexo out in the world? And what do you think about that, Daniel? Is a standard or can it differ from one company to another?
Yes, I think you can say that it's hard to do a standard that fits all the machines in the flexographic industry. And I think that each machine needs each setup. So I think you need a special setup for each machine, and also it's depending on which material you will print on and stuff like that. And I think that we will talk here about, I will talk from the printer side, how to set up a print job like this and to make a standard in-house in Brobygrafiska.
And what Daniel said is that once we have found our standard, we will also see that great results can be achieved in the Flexo process. So we will later on in this presentation show you some samples which are printed here in the school. And by the way, I will also mention that we are actually HD approved, a certificate as an approved HD printer. But that comes both for the printing operation as well as the pre-press operation. So we have the fully length of being capable of doing HD printing from start to the end. And I think that Torbjörn will now tell a little about how do they start when they are in the pre-press side to achieve that standard that can reach the goal that we want to have.
Yes, we're going to talk a little about the test chart that we're using for setting up a standard. And the test chart that I make on the pre-press side is I make it together with Daniel as a printer. So we're going to go into each and every object in the test chart and talk about what I as a pre-press guy looking at and what Daniel as a printer look at. So I think Daniel going to start about the tone scales and talk about them.
Yes, thank you. At first we will see which material we will use. Which material we will use for the print job, and then the printer's job is to see how to equip the printing press, and there it's very important to take control over your analogs and your tape and the doctor blades. And we have also the speed and drying time in our dryer and so on. But it starts with the material, and then when I know which material will be print on and which design that the customer wanted to, so then I talk to Torbjörn, and he make this test chart in 4 color, and I do this mounting on the cylinders, and then I put it into my machine, and I choose the analogs rollers which I think fits best to the material. I do all the settings in the machine for each color, and then I speed up a bit like production and stop the machine. And then when I put the test chart like this, I start to measure in this part on the test chart. This is the start for me, just to see, am I controlling the inks or the color on the print, and also the dot gain, how well are my settings in the machine.
What are you using when you do this? When you do this checking, what kind of instrument do you normally use to be sure? Are you only using your eyes? What is your opinion there?
Yes, of course, I'm using my eyes in the first step, because is there something missing or I need to fix it. But when I see that all parts on this test chart seem to looks nice, and then I use this spectrophotometer. I measure the density, the full tones area, just to measure the strength in the color. And I'm also measuring the dot gain. How bigger are the printing dots due to the digital prepress work?
If we're talking about the instrument here, I know, Torbjörn, that you have worked your whole life with different type of spectrophotometer and also with the densitometer. Why do we prefer to use the not the spectrophotometer, sorry, and not the densitometer here in the stool? Can you explain quickly for us why do we prefer that?
I think that you're talking about two things, Bosse. We're using a densitometer for the process colors as usual, but when we're using special colors, we have to use a spectrophotometer because the densitometer is totally colorblind. So it's only useful, the densitometer is only useful for the process colors. And as Daniel said, when he measuring this tone scale, he has to measure the density, the pigmentation of the ink, so that next time we're going to print, he have the same pigmentation. Because if we, for instance, increase the pigmentation in magenta, we're going to get a reddish look of the print. So he has to determine what are the density values that we're going to print with in this case on the school.
Daniel, if you are running on different occasions, so you have a test print that you want, a test print you have done once, and then the next time you are going to achieve the same result and you put in the same plates, how often do you change the ink supplier then?
We doesn't change the ink supplier at all. But we do. It's very important to do the same as we do when we are printing these test charts. That's the idea. So the setup for the printing press, I need to set them down, and I need to remember them for the next time when it's time to print the design. If we change anything in this work, if we change ink supplier or tape supplier or something, we need to do a new chart for that.
So what you actually are telling us here, Daniel, that is that once you have the key for the first success, you should be sure that you're doing the same thing in the next run, and don't change parameters without doing a new test form. Is that what you're telling us?
Yes, that's what I'm telling you, and that's very important to remember that you had to do the same as you do when you're printing the test form. And of course you should, if you change any parameters in this, you need actually to do a new test chart again.
So shall we hand over then and to start, so Torbjörn explain a little about what does he look upon when he has a test chart that is in his hand and he has received it from Daniel, to be able to produce a good reproduction work which will later on lead to a safe result in the printing machine. How do you go about that, Torbjörn?
Yeah, I try to explain the different objects on the test chart, so you get a little bit a brief knowledge about it. So, but it's always Daniel and I that has communication about the result on the test. So if we look on top of this test chart, we have big squares for what we call trapping. Trapping is a problem that occur when you print on a paper if mostly if you have a problem with drying the inks. So we have to determine if the paper is absorbing the ink and drying the ink good enough for the next color. I think that Daniel has a little about this problem to say.
Yes, when you are printing flexographic printing techniques, the inks need to dry before next ink print on top on it, and there we have the trapping problem sometimes, because with high-speed printing machines, there's a very short time the ink should dry, and then we have trapping problem, because the trapping problem is a drying problem, you can say. And I think what's happened is that if you are printing and you get trapping problem when you're printing, then the first printed ink will not stick to the material exactly when the next ink will print on top on it, and therefore you gotta so to say bad coverage when you're printing 100% on 100%. And yeah, so you want to fill?
I have something to say about that. We're printing in a sequence that we're printing cyan first, magenta as the second color, yellow, and then black as the last color. And the reason we're doing that is that in most of the cases, at least in images, cyan is the color that covering the paper at the smallest area, and yellow is most of the time covering the whole area in images. And if we wet in the paper with yellow ink as a start in the first printing, then we have a problem when we try to put the other inks upon it. If we look on upon the objects for trapping, it's actually colors printed on top of each other. So we have a clean yellow, a clean magenta, a clean cyan. And then we print yellow and magenta on top of each other, cyan and yellow, and cyan and magenta. Then we're trying to measure, if we're printing the cyan as a first color and then magenta on top of it, we try to measure how much of the magenta is actually sticking to the paper. So if you have a good trapping result, approximately 70% of the magenta is actually sticking on top of cyan. But if we have drying problems in our printing machine, it could be down to 30% of the magenta that's sticking to cyan. So we have to determine if we have a problem with drying in the machine, and that is due to the paper or the substrate we're printing on. The next object we're looking upon is the 30% areas that is not so interesting for Daniel and me, but it's very, very interesting for the paper mills. Because in these areas we can see if the print going to be even due to the quality of the paper. So the paper mills can actually determine the quality of the paper by looking at 30% tone of every color.
Torbjörn I just mentioned about trapping, and we know that trapping is one of the problem that can occur if we don't have control over it. And that's of course why we are doing a test print. We want to control each and every part of the print before we start to print on real material in a real order, because that can be very costly if you just have to bring it to the garbage due to you haven't done your home lesson when you started. So those three that Torbjörn was mentioned, which are here for the paper mills, is of course that we are doing a number of test prints for the paper mills, as we are living in what they can say the paper province here in Europe, with a huge number of paper mills surrounding us. But now we will continue our travel here on the test chart. So Torbjörn will explain to us about the next step he's looking at. And I think we are now over to texts and other things. So Torbjörn, can you please explain what are you using more on this test chart to get the full control?
Yeah, we're testing the smallest positive and the smallest negative lines, and also the smallest positive and negative text. And due to the text, it's also very important if the text is containing more than one color. In this area, it's only one color printed, and on the other area, it's up to 4 color printed on the text. I have to know when I make the design the smallest possible text to print in this printing machine on this material, and it's the same with the lines. I have to know the smallest possible line to make, and it's still going to be good in the end result after the print.
But out from your experience, Torbjörn, how often do you see that this vary from printing machine to printing machine, and also maybe from material to material? Do you see huge difference on what one can achieve on lines and texts?
Yeah, if you look on our machine and we print on for instance plastic, we can go down to a text that are size of 6 points. But then if you see on the other hand where they printing post-print corrugated, then you probably need text that are up to 20 points high. So it's a huge difference between what printing machine you're using and what material you're using. So in our case, we are often printing text between 6 and 8 points of size. The next thing we are looking into, and Daniel is also looking into, is what we call the TAC, the total area coverage. We have to determine how much ink the substrate could handle before we get a problem with smearing. And it's a huge difference between printing on plastic or printing on paper. So the first thing we do when printed is to check these areas if we have a smearing problem. And then we have to check where does the smearing problem disappear. Where is the ink drying good enough in the printing machine? Because it's not a good economy to put more pigment on the paper than it could handle. So a good guess for paper is that it could handle around 300% of ink, and when we're looking on plastic with solvent-based inks, we could go up to 370% of ink. So this is a lot forgotten in the printing industry in Sweden today, that the paper has problem or the plastic has problem to handle too much of ink. I think that Daniel probably have some words about this too.
Yes, from the printer's view, we have this is lines for just to visualize how we print, and in this case we have the lines in that direction. It could be in that direction also, because that can be a different way to print, like this or like this. That gives you an idea how to print in that direction and the smallest line. This text also is the same. It's to visualize how good your print and how small text you can print in each color here. Here you can see if you have a problem with your register control, you have big problems in those text where there are more than one color. In this area, me as a printer, I can do this scratch test just to see where's the limit for the material, how much ink can I put on this material.
Yes, and how is this built up? We see numbers here, Torbjörn. What do they represent, those different numbers here, if you look upon them?
If you look in this direction, it's only the black ink. So I have 50% of black, 60, 70, 80, 90, and 100% of black. And in the other direction, you have the amount of cyan, magenta, and yellow. So this area is covered with 100% of black, 90% of cyan, 80% of magenta, and 80% of yellow. So it's approximately 350% of ink.
And that means that if you have a smearing problem, you feel that it's difficult to read, or you can see other marks of smearing, in the press. What is then the recipe to avoid that when you do?
You have to decrease the amount of ink on the substrate, because another problem that could be when you're printing from roll to roll is that you actually get the same print on the back side of the paper or the plastic. The next thing that I only looking into that not a problem for Daniel is this test chart. It's 1,400 different patches of color that I'm going to measure up with a spectrophotometer, and after that I'm going to generate what's called an ICC profile. An ICC profile is my fingerprint of the printing press on this substrate. It tells me nearly everything how the printing press is printing on this substrate. It is telling me about the density, the dot gain, the color of the substrate, the trapping problem, the problem with unclean inks. It tells me everything, and I use it in Photoshop for converting images to the right mixture of cyan, magenta, yellow and black so they optimized for this printing press on this substrate. So this is my most important area of the test print, is this test chart. I use it a lot, and it's as I used to tell my students, it's actually the ICC profile is actually the compass for me in the graphical jungle. Without the ICC profile, I'm totally lost. I have very big problems to make a good pre-press for Daniel when he's going to print.
Yeah, thank you, Torbjörn, for explaining about what is your real compass on this test chart, because for those who are not in the printing industry, I think it can look complicated. However, for our Polish friends here, I think you have seen this before, but I think it's also important that you understand each and every part of it. And when it comes to each and every part of it, Daniel, is this part here, which Torbjörn sees as his compass, is that as important for you as it is for Torbjörn? Or what do you really focus on when you have a test chart in front of you?
Yes, my focus as a printer is not the test chart that Torbjörn are focusing in. My focus is this part of this test chart. Because if I got those parameters as I wanted them to be, with density and the dot gain is correct, and I have good trapping, no trapping problem and so on, I think that this test chart, as Torbjörn needed, is good as well. But I need to do a control, just visualize the picture here, just to see that all parts looks as good as they can. But I think they will do if I take control over this part of the test chart.
But now we have gone through the test chart, and Torbjörn has then done his reproduction work based on what he says is his compass, and then of course also approved that we can print these small lines. And here I would like to put a question to you, Daniel. When we print in the machine direction like here and looking at the smallest lines, should there be any difference on this if we put it instead in the other? This is against the machine direction, but if we put it in the machine direction, should there be any difference then that we could print even finer lines if they are running in the machine direction?
Yes, it's easier to print in the machine direction, actually. So in this direction, it's more difficult to print. And I think if you put them in that direction, which it's possible to print a smaller line than this. But it's also depending on how this test chart is designed and for which design we will use it used for, so to say.
So that's actually also a part of setting standard in Flexo. That is that you should already, when you receive the design work to your print shop, you should see are thin lines printed with, or against the machine direction. Then you know how much you can make. So you see everything goes together, that it is important to check the job when it's coming in and to see how different parameters are printed, like we now mention here about the machine direction on fine lines or against machine direction. But I think we have explained about the test chart now as good as we could, and I think you have got a reasonable understanding about what we are doing and why it is so important that Daniel and Torbjörn has a dialogue between them before they start. So Daniel can tell Torbjörn that this will be printed with this and this analog rollers. The material has this characteristic for me in the machine, and already in that stage Torbjörn know what kind of difficulties is maybe wrong to say, but at least some ideas of how it can perform in the machine. But I think we should now go over and see on some prints that we have done here based upon what we have done in our standardization in the print shop here. So we will bring up some samples and explain a little bit, and definitely Daniel will explain about was this a headache to print, or did it run rather smoothly since we have done our homework. But we will be back to this. For those of you who doesn't know who Brobygrafiska is, I should like to explain a little more about us. We are then a school, a public school, which are placed in the middle of Sweden. You can't say, but at least 1/3. We are, if you draw a line from Stockholm to Oslo, we are closer to Oslo than to Stockholm. And so the easiest way to come is, of course, to fly into Karlstad, but one can also fly into Oslo and Stockholm as well, but Oslo and Karlstad is preferable. We do then, of course, training for students in the school, in the up secondary, and also then after gymnasium. But we also do a lot of training for companies, as we are well equipped to do that. You have already seen in the background of us this Fischer and Kreke machine that we have in S6, and that is very well equipped to do printing tests and print training. And we have recently installed a SpecCon, which can measure actually the density values, all different values that we saw on the test chart in full speed, in the full running speed. That as we have introduced just recently. And our setup of analog rollers, if both the traditional ones down to 420 lines, but we also have this new Uniflex, which is very interesting on the market, and we are on the way now to do many tests on those to see how they are performing. We have of course we have the whole pre-press operation, and as we have mentioned before, it's very important that the pre-press operator know about the print shop and how the job is done there. And as important is, of course, that the printer know about the pre-press job so they can speak to each other. That is the only way to achieve quality. That is to have educated people who understand each other. And that can be done here at Brobygrafiska. But I also would like to mention that on its way in, which is newly invested in, is the new mounting system from FNK, where you can mount the plates so good, so you can have only 15 meter in setup. The smart GPS, as it's called, that will be installed a little bit later this year, maybe around December or something like that. And then within 4 weeks we will also install a brand new packaging line, a Bosch thin seal packaging line. So that means that we can take our students, or those who are studying here, from design up to the product is packed in a new packing line. So we, so to say, fulfill the packaging industry's request for training. So if there should be any interest, we are of course always to your service, and we welcome you to do training or visits at Brobygrafiska at any time. Thank you very much. Yes, we said that we should also look at some print samples, and we have actually taken out here that sample that we printed to be approved and certified HD printer. And that was printed some month ago, half a year ago, something like that. And Daniel was, of course, in charge of the printing machine, and he can just quickly explain how they did it.
Yeah, what I want to explain is more that I think it's a very high quality printed in Flexo, and if we are working with a standard like me and Torbjörn talk about before here, it's possible to print this like a repeat and a repeat again and again. We need to stick to the standard that we are that's come from the test chart from the very beginning. So this was printed in 400 meters per minute, and it's on a plastic material, so it's low amount of ink and lots of heating in the heating system and so on. And I think this is a hard design to print if you don't use the settings from the standard from the very beginning.
Okay, friends, we have been glad to do this presentation for you, and we hope that you have understood that it takes a lot of effort to achieve high quality print in Flexo. And by this, I would like to say thank you very much for listening, and I hand over to Daniel because I think he had more or less the same to say.
Yes, that's correct. I will say thank you to all of you. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you guys, and bye bye.